Hey everybody, real quick before we get into the Season 4 recap of Servant, if you need a Season 3 recap, I put a tab in the upper right-hand corner, just click that. That will also lead you to the Season 2 recap, and that will lead you to the Season 1 recap. But Season 4 picks up a few months after the incidences at the end of Season 3. Dorothy is in rehab. The road to recovery has not been easy for her, but the good news is she's on her way back. In fact, that day she's poised to come home for the first time in weeks. It hasn't been all bad for the Turners, though. Sean's show is doing great. Gourmet Gauntlet is set for another season, and he is the star of it because he has basically become the Philadelphia version of Gordon Ramsay, telling everybody their food sucks, throwing plates, and the crowd loves it. They've got merchandise, they've got cardboard cutouts. Sean Turner has become an absolute star. On this particular day, though, Sean and Julian have gone off to pick up Dorothy from the rehab center. This is leaving Leanne at home alone to get the house ready for Dorothy's return. Leanne throws a cake in the oven for Dorothy, and then she remembers that she bought Dorothy some flowers, but they're out in the car. She runs out to grab them, but when she returns home, she notices that the door is open, and she definitely closed it. So she enters the house on high alert, and she was wise to do so, because somebody from the church has snuck in the house. Leanne is able to fight them off by hitting them over the head with a pot and fleeing to the car. But she's also pretty confused because the homeless encampment near the park has been keeping an eye on her, really protecting her. But they missed this one. They dropped the ball, although it wasn't their fault. They were forced to leave the park after the police scooped them all up and dropped them off at a random location. Leanne frantically texts Roscoe as to where they are, but Snake grabs the phone and explains that it wasn't their fault. And when she says that a neighbor must have called the police, Leanne says no, it wasn't a neighbor, it was definitely the church. As Leanne is sitting in her car, looking all over and seeing people that she suspects are from the church, she tells Roscoe, Snake, and the rest of the group, just get back here as soon as possible. I'll be able to fend these people off in the meantime. She then tries to call up both Sean and Julian, but no luck there. They both send her straight to voicemail. So this is on Leanne to get back in the house, or just out of the car. At one point, it seems like enough time has passed, so she decides to start making her way out of the car, but she does see a hot dog vendor who's on his cell phone. He looks innocent enough, but Leanne's fallen for that before, so she grabs a pen as she makes her way to the house. But when Leanne gets distracted by a bicyclist and she looks up and the hot dog vendor is nowhere to be found, that's when the hot dog vendor strikes, showing his true colors. He is, in fact, a member of the church. And Leanne tries to fight him off until eventually it becomes deadly. She stabs him in the neck with the pen. A woman who's jogging and passing by notices what happened, and she doesn't ask if Leanne's okay. Instead, she goes to check on the guy who was stabbed in the neck. Leanne is kind of frozen, watching this woman checking on the guy who just attacked her, but the woman is also a member of the church. With one hand, she is checking on the guy. With the other hand, she's grabbing some oils. She turns around and throws them in Leanne's face, blinding her temporarily. Leanne quickly tries to make her way back into the car, but in doing so, she drops the key fob underneath the car. This gives the woman a little bit of time to grab Leanne, but Leanne is once again able to fight her off. It's as if members of the church smell blood in the water because a bunch of them come out of the woodworks, surround the car, and start banging on it. It takes Leanne smashing on the horn, which draws attention to them, to finally get them to leave. Basically, these people come out when the street is empty, when no one's looking at them. With Leanne safe in the car for the time being, she splashes some water on her eyes to try to get her vision back, and she thinks she sees Aunt Josephine sitting in the back seat, but it's only for a second. When she gets her bearings together and she notices that the street is clear, she hops out of the car, grabs the key fob, and gets back in and starts the vehicle up. Before she can pull out, though, she notices an old car pull up on the street, stop, and a man get out. The man isn't alone, though. There are two twin girls standing in front of the car, watching him. This mystery man walks up to the driver's side window and starts talking to Leanne. He tells her, "You must come back. It's what's best for us all. We don't want to hurt you." But Leanne, never once looking at him, replies, "But you can't hurt me. I'm not who I used to be. I'm something more. And there is nothing that any of you can do to stop me." He then draws a triangle with two lines coming out of it on the window and backs up from the car. But at this point, there are a lot of people standing in the street watching her, and they're all from the church. Not only that, but there's also a lot of smoke, because members of the church have stuck a bunch of leaves in her exhaust pipe. They're trying to smoke her out. In her quest to get out of the parking space, she never even noticed it until it's too late. She starts choking on all the smoke. She finally looks in her rearview mirror and notices one of the members of the church literally sticking leaves in the exhaust pipe, so she decides to back the car up, pinning him against the vehicle behind her. She still, however, is stuck in the vehicle and it still is filled with smoke. She needs to do something, and that's when you get a reenactment from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Pigeons suddenly attack everybody that's on the street. Now, members of the church are so focused on getting attacked by birds that they don't even notice that Leanne has opened up the skylight to get some clean air. Now, one member of the church does notice this, and he does go and attack Leanne, but right away, he himself is attacked by a bird. These pigeons quite literally scare the members of the church off the street. When Leanne finally gets to the front steps of the house, that's when Snake and Roscoe show up and ask her what happened. And she doesn't tell them. She just says, "It's over. You can go." Leanne heads in the house, cleaning up the mess that she caused when she fought off the initial attacker, and then continuing to prepare for Dorothy's arrival. A short while later, the ambulance drops Dorothy off, wheeling her into the house, and Leanne does say hello, Dorothy, but Dorothy doesn't even respond to Leanne, doesn't even look at her. Instead, just telling Sean, "Take me upstairs." Later that night, with Sean attending to Dorothy, after Julian puts Jericho to bed, Leanne asks him, "What do the doctors think?" And he says, with spinal injuries, it's hard to say. Best case scenario, if she continues with the PT, she'll be able to regain most of her mobility. Worst case, I don't even want to think about. Leanne, though, is optimistic, saying, well, she's home now. She'll get better. Julian isn't so sure, though. Once Sean exits the room, Leanne quickly asks how she's doing, and Sean says she's resting. But when Leanne offers to go check and see if she needs anything, Sean stops her and says, I just don't think that's a good idea. She needs space from all of us. He then tells Leanne good night, and he shuts the door on her. Leanne is standing there pretty shook. She's dumbfounded. She doesn't really know what to say. She feels bad about what happened to Dorothy, and she wants to make it right. She wants to help out. She even baked a cake for Dorothy, but it's clear that her help isn't wanted. But when Sean closed the door, a light bulb in the family basement bursts, and another crack appears. Except this time, the crack doesn't stay in the house. No, this time the crack bleeds on out into the street. And this crack is huge. In episode 2, Leanne convinces Sean to go to a GQ photo shoot that he wasn't planning on going to. He wanted to be there for Dorothy, but Leanne convinces him, no, don't worry about it. I got it. After Sean leaves, Leanne heads upstairs with breakfast for Dorothy along with all of her medication, but Dorothy is not happy to see her at all. She wants to know where Sean is, and she gets super uncomfortable when Leanne tells her that Sean went off to work. When she heads downstairs, Julian is taking care of Jericho. Leanne asks Julian if she can make a meal for Dorothy, and he says, yeah, but it's not going to taste like Sean's. He then goes on to say, oh, by the way, I don't think we should be together when Dorothy's home, recuperating. And Leanne looks at him and says, well, Sean's at work and Dorothy's upstairs healing, so we have to be them now. She then gets up and walks out of the room so Julian can make that dish. And when he finishes it, Leanne takes it upstairs, where Dorothy was watching the news. There's been a violent crime surge in Philadelphia, and the news was covering it. Dorothy, though, doesn't believe that Julian made it. She's very suspicious of anything that Leanne makes her. On top of it, she's pretty miserable because she's scratching all over the place. Because of this, she's pretty nasty to Leanne. She flat out tells her, I don't want you anywhere near me. And when Leanne tries to feed her the food, she spits it out right on Leanne's shoe. Leanne is trying to be very, very patient with Dorothy, but it's tough. She tries to win her over with a welcome home gift. She took all of Jericho's old clothes that he grew out of, and she made a quilt out of it. And one of those items was the yellow onesie that Jericho was wearing the night he died. It's dead center. This really infuriates Dorothy, who yells at Leanne, it's a mother's job to give away her child's clothes, not yours. Leanne then leaves, and a few hours later she returns. Dorothy still isn't eating, and she's concerned about it, so she decides to incentivize her by bringing in Jericho and letting Dorothy see him. This is the first time she's seen him since the fall. Because of this, Dorothy gets super excited, and she doesn't care when Leanne demands that she eat some food before Leanne hands him over. Although the visit lasts all of maybe a minute before Leanne grabs Jericho back and says, all right, that's enough. We don't want you overexerting yourself. Leanne puts Jericho back in his crib, heads downstairs, and she finds Toby in the kitchen. Toby's helping out with Sean while he does all the GQ gourmet gauntlet stuff. Toby can tell that there's something going on with Leanne. She just looks miserable. And she confides in him that Dorothy came back from the hospital, and even though she thinks she knows better, she doesn't. It's really bothering Leanne that Dorothy is acting the way she is. About an hour later, there's a knock at the door, and it's Courtney. Leanne answers and tells Courtney, yeah, Dorothy's resting right now. But to Leanne's surprise, Courtney says, well, Dorothy texted me to come over, and basically forces her way in. She heads upstairs and starts laughing with Dorothy. The two are chatting. And with the door cracked, Leanne is standing outside of it watching all of this. That is, until Courtney gets up and closes the door at Dorothy's behest. Leanne heads downstairs and is just sitting on the step, thinking about everything that's happened that day and how nothing she's done has worked, when Sean comes back. And when she asks Sean, what are you doing here? He says, well, Dorothy asked me to come back. And the fact that Dorothy texted Courtney and called Sean upsets Leanne even more. But there's a bigger issue. There's a full-blown bedbug infestation all over the block. There are bug crews outside going door to door handling it. The Turner residence hasn't been touched, and while neither Sean or Leanne have been itchy, they decide to check, and sure enough, there are bedbugs all over that house, which would explain why Dorothy keeps itching. And her scratching has gotten worse and worse as the day has progressed. As Sean goes room to room, figuring out which of them has bedbugs, Julian is downstairs trying to get in touch with an exterminator that can help him out quickly. That's when his dad knocks on the door in a full hazmat suit. The good thing is he brought hazmat suits for everybody. Sean comes downstairs, starts putting the hazmat suit on, but he's in a situation because he can't move Dorothy. All he can do is wait for them to get an exterminator. But while Sean and Julian are putting on the hazmat suits downstairs, Dorothy is awoken to Leanne shaving her leg. It's a super weird scene. It's with a straight razor. It freaks Dorothy out. And when she kind of tries to kick Leanne off of her, she ends up cutting her leg pretty good. Leanne is so frustrated by this because she's trying to do a nice thing for Dorothy, or at least that's the way she conceives it in her head, that she grabs some, goes over to Dorothy and starts smashing it in her face to, quote, give her some color. And Dorothy bites her. That causes Leanne to storm out of the room. A little while later, Sean finally comes upstairs and sees Dorothy for the first time. She's pretty pissed off at him for taking this long, and he explains, I came home as soon as I could, and I've been here for a while, but we're dealing with a bedbug infestation. Don't worry, though. I'm going to handle it. What Dorothy's more concerned with, though, is the fact that Sean left her alone with Leanne. At this point in the day, Dorothy and Leanne are the only ones not wearing a hazmat suit. Dorothy, because it'd be too much of a pain to get her in it, and Leanne, just by choice. It might be because Leanne is just so damn frustrated. As she stands over Jericho's crib, Julian comes in, and Leanne vents to Julian, it doesn't matter how much I give you guys. Either you or Sean or Dorothy. You guys are just miserable all the time. I mean, do you know how horrible it feels to be taken for granted? It's infuriating. It's like bugs crawling under your skin. And then she walks out. But it's interesting timing saying that with what's going on. Leanne continues, though, doing her job. She goes and grabs a bedpan and storms into Dorothy's room where she interrupts a conversation between Dorothy and Courtney and tells Courtney to kick rocks because Dorothy has to go big potty. Right before Courtney leaves, Dorothy says, you'll make that call for me, right? And Courtney assures her, yep, I will, and then walks out. That's when things get downright disgusting. Because Dorothy does go to the bathroom. She does pee in the bedpan. But as Leanne is trying to wiggle it out underneath of her, Dorothy intentionally bumps into it and piss flies all over Leanne. For Leanne, this is about the final straw. She tells Dorothy accidents happen, but I just have to clean up after you all the time. And then she strips her down, leaving her on the bed with nothing but that quilt from Jericho's old clothes. On the first floor, though, the bedbug situation has gotten worse and worse. I mean, it's got to be one of the worst cases anyone's ever seen. The frustration of not getting an exterminator in a timely manner is getting to everybody. So Julian walks out and talks to one of the guys saying, dude, you're not doing anything. Can you please get in that house and do something? And while this lowly worker goes to get his boss to talk to Julian about the situation, one of the people from the homeless encampment walks up and says to Julian, it's fantastic, isn't it? Her gifts grow every day. You must be in awe. I mean, look at this. She did this to protect us from those that want to do us harm. She's shielding us, shielding your family. Julian brushes this woman aside, just saying, I think it's just more of a matter of hygiene. But the woman grabs him by the arm and says, you can feel it, can't you? When you're close to her, there's something that pulls you in and tells you that she is the way. It's her power. And while he doesn't admit it to this woman, yeah, there is something about Leanne that he can't quite pinpoint. At dinner time, Leanne brings up Dorothy's dinner, and Dorothy is crying, saying, "Do whatever you want, just let me see my son." Leanne, though, doesn't even respond to that. She tells Dorothy, "You used to like me. What happened to that?" And Leanne is fighting back tears as she says this. Dorothy shoots back, "I realized what you are. You're evil." Leanne processes this and tells Dorothy, "I'm starting to realize something about the people around you. They love you very much. But I think even more than that, they're afraid of me. It used to bother me, but I'm starting not to mind it so much. I mean, I think they're so afraid that they wouldn't even step foot inside this room if they knew that I was in here. Probably not even if you screamed. So right now, I'm all you've got." And then she leaves, leaving Dorothy terrified. At nighttime, the hail comes, and so does Uncle George. He comes stumbling down the block and asks one of the exterminators how many houses were affected. And the guy tells him it was basically the whole block. The good news for the Turners is the exterminators have finally arrived. But the bad news for Sean is GQ wants him back the next day, which he can't quite figure out. He just did a full interview with them. And now they want him back. It's weird. Leanne is listening to Sean complain about this, but there's still stuff in the house that she needs to do. So she goes about doing it, but when she comes up from the basement, she notices that the front door is ajar, and she gets concerned. She heads upstairs to see if Dorothy is okay, and to her surprise, there are two strangers standing there, and Dorothy seems very, very comfortable. Dorothy informs Leanne that these two women are the live-in nurses that Dorothy hired to help her. This really blindsides Leanne, and when she asks Dorothy why, Dorothy just says to her, "I think you know why. You're not going to win this battle, Leanne. You can go now." And then the two nurses close the door in Leanne's face. In episode 3, the live-in nurses introduce themselves to Julian, Sean, and Leanne. Their names are Roberta and Beverly, and they seem nice enough, but Leanne is very skeptical of them. She's convinced that they're a part of the church, and they're just slithering their way into the house. They'll be living in a room next to the basement. It's sort of a part of the house, but not really. You have to go out of it to get into the actual main house. It's sort of like a quasi-apartment next door. Leanne was supposed to live in there, but she never moved in. That night, Leanne is having pillow talk with Julian, saying how they're definitely members of the cult, but Julian says, "No, I checked their references. They seem legit. Maybe you should give them a chance?" And Leanne snaps, "Well, maybe you should look harder." Whether she likes it or not, Bev and Bobby, as she goes by, well, they're here to stay. They've even brought gifts for everybody. It's books. In the morning, they start giving it to the people in the family. They give Julian a book on organization. They also give Sean a book on how to better communicate with his wife. And Leanne gets a book called Social Skills for Teens. Nobody really appreciates these gifts. They also got Jericho a stuffed animal, but as soon as Leanne sees it, she just tosses it in the trash. Bev and Bobby being there is helpful in a way. It's freeing up Sean and Leanne to do other things. That day, because his schedule allows it, Sean makes Dorothy one of her favorite meals. But Dorothy isn't in a great mood. She's frustrated because Bev and Bobby continue to have her do the same exercises that she's been doing for months with no improvement whatsoever. She just wants to be better at this point. She rushes the rehab so much that she forces them to help her stand up and walk, but she can't. She ends up face planting. They help her get back in bed and tell her, "You gotta stay in bed for a week. Give your body time to recover." Dorothy doesn't want to sit in bed for a week. She brings up an alternative method. There's got to be something else that they can do. And Bobby says, "Yeah, we can talk about it." As they finally leave Dorothy's room, they're approached by a very angry Leanne. Even though Leanne threw that stuffed animal out, it reappeared. So she approaches both Bev and Bobby and says, "Is this supposed to be some kind of warning?" "Well, I don't know what you're waiting for. Go ahead. Do what you want to do." Both Bev and Bobby have no idea where this is coming from or what she's talking about. They explain that they bought that doll from the Amish in Lancaster. But Leanne doesn't believe any of it. She also doesn't appreciate the fact that they reorganized part of her room. After the confrontation, Leanne storms off, and Bev and Bobby head downstairs to find Sean getting rid of the meal that he cooked for Dorothy and she didn't want. They have a serious matter to discuss with Sean. It's Dorothy's hope. They feel like it's waning quickly. They're also concerned about the mood in the house. They tell Sean that Leanne doesn't trust them, Julian doesn't open up to him, and it's clear to them that Dorothy resents Sean. So they want to get down to the root of it all. They ask Sean to tell them everything. And he tells them that he doesn't think the family copes well with loss. He doesn't bring up Jericho's name, instead bringing up Dorothy and Jericho's mom as an example. That's when they suggest that everybody get down and do a seance. Later that night, everybody meets in Dorothy's room. Candles are lit, and while nobody expected her to show up, Leanne does. Bobby runs the seance. People are going to put an item on the table to channel the spirits, and the first item that's put on, Bobby finds a spirit. Dorothy thinks it's her Uncle Robert, and Bobby says, yeah, that's him. He's here. The next person that Bobby brings up fits the description of Dorothy's mother. It's worth mentioning this entire time, Julian doesn't believe any of this is real. Bobby ignores Julian's criticism and tells Dorothy that this woman, who fits her mother's description, is telling Dorothy that it's okay to need support. She also adds in that it's time to forgive yourself. People make mistakes. And that has Julian's ears perk up. Bobby then notices something else. She says it's a warning. She's seeing the house that they're in, but it's different. The paint's peeling, the floors, the walls, they're rotting. She's then on the street and she can see a black vision in the windows moving about. She knows that it's evil. And whatever this evil is, it is tethered to the house. But it's also tethered to the family. All of this is very disturbing for Dorothy to hear. But it gets even more upsetting when Bobby says she starts to hear a baby crying. Dorothy, forgetting what happened to Jericho, says her grandmother lost a child once. Maybe it's hers. But Julian and Sean, knowing what happened, try to put an end to the seance right then and there. As they ask Bobby to stop, she clutches her ears and starts screaming in pain. Sean is trying to put an end to it. Dorothy, though, is pleading with Bobby to keep going with it. And finally, Bobby says, yeah, it's time to close the door to the other side. But Leanne steps forward and says, no, I still have an item that I want you to look at. And she puts the dagger on the table. Leanne thinks that that was the item that Bobby and Bev were looking for in her room when they rearranged everything. But Bobby says, I've never seen that before in my life. And Leanne yells at her to pick it up. She starts getting really descriptive on how Bobby is supposed to use it, just in case she forgot. Both Bev and Bobby are both pretty mortified by this. And they're also very confused when Leanne says, why don't you tell everybody who you really are? She then bum rushes Bobby and rips the shirt off her back, hoping to see scars there to prove her point. But there's nothing. It's just the back of an old lady. Sean and Julian turn the lights on and help Bobby to her feet. Sean also yells at Leanne, saying, you can't rip the clothes off of everybody who comes into this house. It's at that moment that Leanne admits Bobby and Bev aren't one of them, but she had to make sure. And then she gets kicked out of the room by Dorothy. Later that night, Julian comes and confronts Leanne about what she did and asks, how far were you going to go if she had scars on her back? And Leanne tells him, I would have killed her. Leanne is visited that night by Bobby's vision. As Leanne is dreaming, she has a nightmare. She gets so spooked that she goes into Dorothy's room and sleeps on her one-person bed. When Dorothy wakes up in the middle of the night and notices that Leanne is spooning her, she gets very concerned and very freaked out. In episode 4, it is Halloween, a holiday that Leanne has never once celebrated. But while she doesn't celebrate it, the city does. I mean, there's vandalism from Mischief Night all over the place. And let me just say, it must just be this block because I've lived in Philadelphia all my life and we've never seen this. And while it's scary to come out to your car and see a dick sprayed in shaving cream, what's even more scary is what's going on inside the house with Leanne. She's confiding in that mannequin, acting like it's her mother, and saying how she hurts people when she gets angry, and she's starting to like it. After having this hard-hitting discussion with that mannequin, she heads up to the attic and finds both Bev and Bobby going through a bunch of the items from Dorothy's mother. They're looking for a last-minute costume for Jericho, and they're just having trouble finding one. They ask Leanne if she's planning on getting dressed up, and she says no, Halloween's for children. But Bobby says, oh, no, it's not. Halloween's a space to embrace your fears. You know, indulge in your darkest fantasies. This gives Leanne an idea. After Bev and Bobby rummage through that trunk, she takes the trunk outside to the homeless encampment. She opens up the trunks and says, I want you all out in the streets tonight. They're coming for me. They infiltrated my neighborhood. I think they've even bought one of the houses on the block. So tonight, I'm going hunting. These people are really good at hiding who they are, but if I get close enough, they always reveal themselves to me. But with these costumes, tonight we get to hide who we are too. As Leanne was talking to her homeless homies, Sean decided to decorate the house. Halloween has always been a favorite holiday of Dorothy, and she's just been in such a bad mood that he wants to brighten her spirits a bit. Julian tells Sean, this is a lost cause. As long as me and you are Team Leanne, Dorothy's never going to approve. And Sean is a little taken aback and says, I'm not Team Leanne. But Julian says, are you sure about that? She seems to make everything work out all right for you. It's something Sean's never thought of, but now the seed is planted in his head. Sean decides to decorate the house anyway, sending a picture to Dorothy, and she actually does like it. She gives him tips on putting more blood outside. But she's dealing with her own issue. The costume that Bev and Bobby put Jericho in, it's just not right. And Bev asked Dorothy, what did you put him in last year? Maybe we can dress him up in that. But the thing is, Dorothy can't remember. And the fact that she can't remember really bothers her. She feels like she is a terrible mother for not being able to remember what she dressed her child in on his first Halloween. She's also concerned that she has this whole period in her life that is just blank. She has no idea what happened. Sean comes into the room and interrupts this conversation because he's taking Jericho out. He decides to dress Jericho up in a lobster outfit, and he's going to play the chef. It's time to go trick-or-treating. But as Sean heads out, Leanne gets ready to do the same thing. She dresses up as this morbid doll. Right before she does head out, she's having a conversation with Julian, who's tasked with giving out the candy. And like most Halloweens, the doorbell rings quite frequently. That's when Leanne shows her ignorance to what Halloween actually is, because she grabs one such kid, scaring the crap out of him and dragging him into the house. It forces Julian to apologize to the parents, and he goes, what the hell are you doing? Halloween's about a PG scare, not a scare that sends you into therapy. He's legitimately pissed. He's also out of candy, so he leaves to go grab some more, and Leanne sees somebody standing outside that looks like they're just a trick-or-treater, but Leanne, being cautious, has her dagger behind her back. It turns out, though, it's just Toby. Leanne heads out to go on this hunting spree, and Toby follows her along, even though she continually tells Toby not to. The first house she goes to that she's suspicious of, it just turns out that they're cranky. They're new to the neighborhood, but they don't really pose a threat. The second house that Leanne was suspicious of, there's nothing there either. Leanne really tries to provoke the homeowner by even going inside this guy's house, but he doesn't, quote, reveal himself like somebody from the cult would. The fact that Leanne is striking out, it's really frustrating her. To make things worse, even though she told Toby to go home, she's got him following along. But then she gets to a point on the street where she realizes that whoever is behind her is not Toby. And that's when she figures that it must be somebody from the cult. So she attacks them, breaking their arm in half. Although it wasn't anyone from the cult. It was just a stupid teenager trying to scare her. Leanne isn't remotely remorseful about this. She simply likes terrorizing a little too much, and this is the holiday to do it. Her final act is terrifying a little girl who had the audacity to say, "Boo!" at her. Using whatever power she has, she's able to set off the electricity boxes, sending everybody fleeing away from the street. It's as if the electrical wires literally just got cut by something. The fact that she's dangerous comes as no surprise to one individual who was watching her the entire night. It's her Uncle George, who was hiding behind a very simplistic ghost costume. He's been using Roscoe as a sleeper agent. Roscoe stopped by the encampment, but all they were doing was just getting drunk and partying in costumes. They weren't really being effective like Leanne wanted them to. So when he meets with George, he tells him they've all gone crazy. And George says her ideas are spreading into others. I mean, she's even attacking children. George's big concern is they waited too long to stop her, but at this point, their plan has to work. Roscoe's big concern is the fact that he has kids, and if Leanne finds out what he's up to, she's going to come after him and them. But George says, if she wins, there will be no world for your kids. We need you. You've kept us close to the family, and they're the only way that we can reach her. Roscoe is still a little bit concerned about this, and George can sense that, so he tells him, fear not. Certain pieces are already in place, and when the time comes, even the Turners will be ready to help us. George isn't wrong about that. When Leanne gets home, she's got a huge smile on her face as if she didn't just terrorize the entire block, but she can tell that something is wrong with Sean. He sits her down and says, I owe you everything. I know that. And I'm so grateful. But if it means losing my family and losing Dorothy, I don't want it. Leanne, though, cuts him off right there and says, Sean, you've already made your choice, so be an adult and deal with the consequences. And then she leaves. Sean then heads upstairs and wakes Dorothy up and says to her, I'm sorry. I only did what I thought was best for our family. I've lost you, and I'm not okay with that. And as long as she's in the house, you're never going to forgive me. So I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to get rid of Leanne. The next morning, when Sean wakes up, he's able to get Dorothy into a wheelchair. This is the first time that Dorothy's mobile since the accident. They get her downstairs, and Leanne is beside herself. She yells at Sean, she's not ready for this. But Sean just looks at her and says, Leanne, it's fine. We got this. When Sean goes to grab Bev and Bobby and Leanne in her room, somebody slides a note under the door, and Dorothy takes it upon herself to grab it before Leanne does. Leanne is probably right. Dorothy isn't ready for that strain just yet because she falls out of the chair and it's pretty painful. She is, however, able to grab the note before Leanne notices. When they get in their bedroom, Dorothy and Sean open up the letter. It's addressed to them, and it is, in fact, from the church. The note says, CLS has laid claim to a nearby sanctuary. We want our wayward flower back. Give us an opportunity this Thursday after dark, and your family shall be left in peace. This could be the opportunity that the Turners were looking for to get rid of Leanne. Basically just giving her up to the church. While Dorothy thinks it's an absolute gift, Sean is a little more hesitant. He tells her, the church wanted this before. They failed. And Dorothy says, well, they'll be better prepared this time. Dorothy really wants this to work out. She knows she has to play some kind of role in it. And while she doesn't want to outwardly hand over Leanne to the church, she wants to set them up in a situation where it's very convenient for them to grab her. So she decides to hold a cocktail party. Welcome all the new neighbors in the area to the house. And there's a lot of new neighbors. They know that this is risky. They can't let Jericho out of their sight during this party. They can't risk losing him again. And while Leanne will put up a fight about it, they'll just have Bev and Bobby distract her. They also don't want Julian getting in the way, so they get him one ticket to the Sixers game, and he has no interest in going solo. Dorothy gets serious with him and says, well, we can't have Leanne go with you. We need her here. And honestly, this thing between you guys is weird. We need to know what side you're on. Julian takes offense to it and tells them, keep your ticket. I don't know what you guys are plotting, but this is Leanne's home now. She belongs here. And Sean disputes that, saying, actually, Julian, she doesn't. This sparks a fight between the two, where Julian does have a good point. He realizes that they're trying to get rid of Leanne, and he says, every time you've tried that in the past, you failed miserably. Julian doesn't want to have this conversation, though, in front of his sister. She's too far gone. He feels like he can talk to Sean about it. And what he's learning is Sean is firmly on his wife's side. Sean points out the elephant in the room, that Leanne has some kind of supernatural ability. Julian gaslights Sean, and Sean says, okay, I challenge you. Watch what happens around her in the next couple days. And if you don't feel like anything's wrong with her after these couple of days, then you can medicate me. He goes to get ready to head out to go invite these neighbors to the party, and Leanne stops him. She says, you really should be on set. And he lies, saying that there was a last-minute schedule change. But Leanne knows that it's a lie. And she says to him, in a very creepy way, you really shouldn't keep secrets from me, Sean. And then she lets him go about his business. He goes door to door, inviting all the neighbors to the cocktail hour on Thursday. Everyone seems really receptive to it. There is a younger couple across the street who just moved in, and they do seem like they would fit the narrative of people from the church, just because they seem to be hunkering down for the apocalypse. Ironically, a chef doesn't know what a Costco trip looks like when he sees one. Either way, if they are from the church, they're exactly who Sean is looking for and exactly the kind of person that Sean wants to invite to this party. And they agree to come. That night, Dorothy and Sean are discussing their plan, how to go around the room and subtly question people on why they bought a house in the neighborhood. That's when Dorothy looks outside and Leanne is basically holding a church service in the homeless encampment. She's showing them part of her secret. She has a book, the same book that Sean's found before with weird drawings of things that have happened, and she starts ripping pages out, giving it to the homeless people, telling them, if you want something, you write it down on the piece of paper. Then the answer's going to come to you. You just have to believe that you deserve it. Dorothy can't believe that it's gotten this bad, just because she hasn't been out of bed this long. She can't believe that this group has grown to this size. All this does is confirm to Dorothy that Leanne needs to get the hell out of here. The next morning, Sean wakes up, he starts making some food for this party, and Leanne walks downstairs. She grabs a butcher knife and says, isn't it funny how some things that are so useful can be so deadly when in the wrong hands? And then she starts jabbing the butcher knife into her hand. Sean slowly takes it away from her, but he is concerned. She then starts questioning him on why he's having this party, and he uses Dorothy's lack of social interaction as the reason. Leanne, though, knows that's not true. Whether she likes it or not, that night the party rages on. All the neighbors show up. A lot of people have shown up just because they're big fans of Sean. There's an older couple that seems to be really infatuated with Sean. At least the wife does, and the husband doesn't really seem to mind. But as the night goes on, they start questioning the group, one by one. If they bring up art, they question who their favorite artists are to find out if they're faking it. They start questioning their religions. They try to bring it up as if it's natural conversation, but they're really bad at this. While this party goes on, though, Leanne isn't sitting idle. She's making her way around the room and asking very similar questions to Dorothy and Sean, but she's also having some of her minions from the park rummage through neighbors' houses. She, just like the Turners, have the same questions. Which one of their new neighbors is from the church? Snake gets the answer to that. As she's in the apartment of the couple across the street, the same couple that just seemed to be going on a Costco run that piqued Sean's interest earlier, she finds a very interesting needlework. It is absolutely creepy as hell. And it says, "Wash my sins with blood, anoint me with your spirit." Being a former member of the church, Snake knows what church items look like, and she knows that this couple is, in fact, from the Church of the Lesser Saints. The issue is they don't have a way to get this news to Leanne. She's still in the party, although Dorothy is trying to set it up where she gets taken. She sends Leanne outside to lock the patio gate. And the husband of that woman who was really into Sean goes outside, but he doesn't go to attack Leanne. He goes to hit on her because turns out this couple has a very open marriage. He felt like there was a vibe. There clearly wasn't a vibe. It's just a creepy old guy trying to get laid by a way younger girl. Dorothy actually breaks up the uncomfortable conversation when she realizes that this guy isn't taking Leanne. Leanne thanks Dorothy because, as I said, it is an uncomfortable situation. But Dorothy snaps, "That wasn't to help you." And Leanne asks, "Why can't you just be nice to me?" Dorothy gets closer into the light and says, "Listen to me. We do not have a relationship that needs amending. We have nothing. I've tolerated your presence only because I've had to. But I'm not an invalid anymore, and I have no obligation to care about you. And trust me, I don't." They both then have to head back into the party and act like everything's normal. Dorothy and Sean, though, realize their plan isn't working. They need to do something else. That's when Dorothy comes with the idea of Sean going down in the basement and cutting the circuit breaker and give whoever needs it the opportunity to take Leanne. A couple minutes later, the whole house goes dark. Sean comes back upstairs holding lights for everybody and claims that this is a normal occurrence. It's an old house. Even after this, though, Leanne hasn't been taken, and frustration is mounting for Dorothy. She pulls Sean aside and says, "Can you make it any darker?" But he assures her, "You gotta be patient. We're so close." And Leanne overhears this. She knows the Turners are now setting her up to be taken by the church. Especially after she overhears Sean say, "We did everything right. They want her. This is nearly over." Leanne's pretty mortified by this. But Sean wasn't wrong. It is nearly over. Because a few seconds later, Leanne has a bag put over her head and she's trying to be kidnapped out of there. The younger couple from across the street is trying to get her out the door, but Leanne's putting up a damn good fight. Both Dorothy and Sean see it happening, but they just allow it to happen, not intervening at all. That's when the entire house starts to shake. The cracks in the basement, they get way worse. But the cracks in the basement lead to cracks in the house. It's as if the house is on a fault line and there's an earthquake going on. Because the house is shaking, items fall from the ceiling and it hits the attackers directly on their head. It seems to finally stop when Leanne takes the hood off, but not before she scares the crap out of Sean by having the chandelier fall just inches from landing directly on him. Everybody's pretty scared in the house. Julian is holding a crying Jericho and he's cowering in the corner. He's starting to realize that what Sean said might be true. Leanne, though, is pissed off. She looks at all of them and says, "We're a family. What is it going to take to make you understand that?" She then walks out of the house and sees the destruction that she caused. A complete sinkhole has opened up on the street. It's huge. And Leanne seems very proud of herself. In episode 6, the sinkholes have made the news. It's a huge deal around the city, so much so that the mayor is thinking about evacuating the entire block. But he hasn't done it yet, and Leanne decides she's going to throw Jericho a birthday party. The problem is, it's not his birthday. So it's a 1.5-year-old's birthday party. It's a party that Dorothy has no interest in whatsoever. She doesn't even want to go. But Leanne tells her, well, you wouldn't want people to think you're an uninvolved mother, would you? Just like everything with this family, it's a point of contention. Leanne has prepared all of it, inviting the guests and even having a petting zoo. That's still not enough to get a decent crowd, though. Leanne invited people way too late. And as this pitiful party rages on outside, inside, both Dorothy and Sean are wondering if the cult just gives up trying to get her after the events of the other night. Dorothy says aloud, there's got to be some way to end this. And Sean looks outside and says, yeah, Julian. Maybe there's a way we can still get through to him. The Turners then reluctantly do head outside. Just in enough time to hear Leanne give a super weird speech thanking people for coming. Leanne notices, though, that people don't have the hats that she ordered on their heads. She commands Julian to go inside, and that's when Sean takes his opportunity to try to get through to Julian, although it's not working. Julian still thinks that Sean is overreacting to all of it, that there's nothing wrong whatsoever with Leanne, and he's completely oblivious to the fact that he is whipped. Sean continues, though. It gets really heated, and it only ends when Leanne calls for Julian, and he jumps to it. Even though Leanne's intentions for this party were good, it ends up being a little bit of a disaster. The petting zoo that she ordered, well, the pets aren't well behaved. A goat starts ripping up Leanne's dress. It makes Leanne have to go inside and change, and when she does, she hears the faint crying of a baby. She follows it up to her bathroom, and sure enough, there's a baby she doesn't recognize in her tub. She's kind of confused, but then somebody is hiding behind the door and attacks her. It's somebody from the church. This person has help, though. They have help from the neighbors across the street. They're back. All three of these people work in tandem to try to get Leanne down, throw the oil in her eyes, and go through the ceremony. Leanne, though, using some ingenuity, is able to attack all of them, stabbing the one girl in the thigh and knocking the other two out. She makes a call to one of her minions, telling them that there are 3 of them in the upstairs room, and then she heads back downstairs as if nothing happened. While she was away, though, Dorothy made an attempt to convince Julian that he needs to think about this relationship. When she says to Julian, you're clearly picking sides, he says, I'm not. I just feel bad for her. Her mom was not nice to her, dragging her to all these pageants. And Dorothy remembers that on her first year on the job, she covered pageants. She saw firsthand how mean these mothers were. Once Julian is able to get away from Dorothy in the conversation, he gets instructed by Leanne to go in the house and get the cake. The problem is he can't find the candles anywhere. As he, Leanne, and even Sean start looking around the house for the candles, they hear a goat banging on the glass. It's really bizarre behavior. The goat continues to bang and bang until finally he bangs his way through the door, breaking the glass. When he does, it causes Julian to actually drop the cake. Leanne instructs Julian to clean up the cake and walks outside as if that is a normal occurrence. It gives Sean another opportunity to pitch Julian on the fact that she is weird, something going on. Julian, though, is still in denial. He walks outside, they start to sing happy birthday, and that's when all hell breaks loose. The Dorothy that was hired to be Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, she's been drinking the whole time. She knocks in the table of food, which causes Julian to fall backwards and the cake falls on top of him. This fake Dorothy then pukes on a guy, Exorcist style. He knocks into the petting zoo, where a couple of snakes get loose. Leanne ends up getting bit by this fake Dorothy's dog, fake Toto. It's a pretty bad bite, and Beverly notices it, and she says, we got to clean that up. I have some hydrogen peroxide in my apartment. Come on, come downstairs. Leanne reluctantly heads downstairs with Beverly, but the whole time, she's looking at the disaster that this party has caused. As she's sitting in the chair in Beverly's apartment, thinking about what went wrong, she feels a pinch. And it's Beverly, injecting her with something. It's definitely not hydrogen peroxide. Leanne stands up because now she knows that Beverly is with the church. But whatever Beverly injected her with knocks her out. As Beverly prepares for the ceremony downstairs, upstairs, the conversation between Sean and Julian continues, and it gets really, really heated. Blame gets thrown around regarding Jericho's initial death, and it causes the two to actually come to a physical confrontation. It only stops when the two start smelling smoke, and they realize it's not coming from their part of the house, it must be coming from downstairs. That's because Beverly had lit a fire to heat up the dagger. Julian knows that he has to go save Leanne, and while he heads downstairs, Sean is yelling at him to let it happen. But Leanne never needed Julian's help. She woke up and saw Beverly dancing, whipping herself, but when Beverly went to the drawer to grab the dagger, Leanne just started staring at her. It caused Beverly to freeze right in her tracks. So when Julian gets downstairs, he's shocked because there's Beverly frozen still, but her hand is huge. I mean, it looks like Andre the Giant's hand. And then the rest of her body starts to swell. Leanne is fixated on her the entire time. Finally, Beverly drops to the ground and is frothing at the mouth. She's not doing well. And when Sean makes his way downstairs, he's really surprised to see her in this kind of state. While Sean is concerned for Beverly, and so is Julian to an extent, Leanne isn't. She's actually laughing at it. Sean calls an ambulance for Bobby, and a little while later, the ambulance takes her away. Roberta claims her innocence, telling Dorothy that she had no idea. She knew Beverly for years, but she didn't know this side of her. She ends up resigning over it. All of this, though, has finally woken Julian up. He realizes now that Sean was right. The two apologize to each other, but now they have a bigger issue. What to do about Leanne. After everybody goes to bed that night, Dorothy starts thinking about what Julian said about the pageants. There was also something that Bobby said about Leanne's infatuation with Dorothy. So Dorothy decided to go looking through her old tapes, and she finds one from covering a pageant. And she's shocked because when she pops it in, sure enough, there's a 9-year-old Leanne Grayson interviewed by a young Dorothy Turner. In episode 7, Dorothy, first thing in the morning, calls her news director and says, "Hey, I've got this clip. I need you to look into it." And it's the clip of Leanne from years ago. Most of the time when you're on the news, you have to fill out a form saying that you're allowing the news to use any video of you. Because of this, Dorothy thinks that there might be some information lying around the station regarding Leanne. But the news director tells her we have nothing. This is a pretty big blow to Dorothy. She's not the only one having a rough start to her day, so is Julian. He couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, so he got up, he snuck down Sean's office, and he opened up this book with angels and demons and Lucifer, God. Everything's got his mind just swirling at the moment. Julian needs to confront Sean about this book. He does so, and they go in the basement to discuss it. After doing some research, Sean thinks that this is what's called the Faustian bargain. When she's angry, things go bad. When she's happy, things go well. And all of this remains intact if they stay loyal to her. Sean knows that it sounds crazy, but it was also crazy when a doll turned into his son. He starts pointing out that what if that headstone that Julian found of Leanne, what if it wasn't fake? What if it was real? What if Leanne actually died and she came back as something? The cult believes that they're servants of God. What if Leanne was one of those servants, but when she left, she became the, quote, fallen angel? As the two are talking about this, though, Julian starts hacking up a lung, as if he can barely breathe. Julian cannot get a word out. And now he's questioning if Leanne did this to him. As they're writing down possible solutions for the Leanne problem, Roscoe pops out of nowhere. He tells both of them that there's someone there to see them, and it's Uncle George. They go meet in Bev and Bobby's old small apartment. And they're pretty surprised because Uncle George looks like he's had a complete makeover. He no longer looks dirty, he actually looks normal. He tells both of them, "It's time I told you the truth." He tells them that he's recently left the church and he's here to right some wrongs. One of those wrongs is Leanne. Everything going on, it's all a scam. He explains that Leanne's family died in a fire, but Leanne had blamed herself for this. Because she blamed herself, she was a perfect candidate to joining the Church of the Lesser Saints. So they recruited her, telling her that she had actually died in that fire and she was reborn to be a servant of God. What they didn't factor in for was just what a nut job Leanne is. It's been a snowball effect where now Leanne believes she's actually special, like she's something else. In reality, she's nothing special because the beliefs of the church have always been an illusion. What Leanne is deranged, delusional, but also very ordinary. Sean cannot believe this. He says, "I've seen too much." And George points out some of the more recent things, like what happened with Bev. That was because of a snake bite from the petting zoo. As for the loss of taste back in the day, that could be because she was putting something in his food. Sean brings up splinters, but George says, "Oh yeah, she would do that to punish us as well. She would hide him in our bed." But then there's the big one, Jericho. George gets up and shows them where she got Jericho from. The house that they're in is very old, And there's actually an alleyway that used to be for sick people. It's pretty much hidden. You'd have to look for it to really see it. Hell, Shawn didn't even know about it. And that's where they would bring Jericho in. Jericho is the baby of a drug addict that Leanne found passed out in the street dead. Leanne took the baby and used it as Jericho. When she needed to hide Jericho, she would put it in that apartment, tucked away in the tunnel. Then she would bring him back out when need be. So then it begs the question, why them? And George tells them that she's been obsessed with Dorothy. Dorothy interviewed her when she was a young girl at a pageant, and she's just followed her around ever since. George knew that it was an obsession, but he felt like it was a healthy one. So once a year, they would find Dorothy, find where she was broadcasting from, and just kind of watch. But the obsession became a bit too much. And when she saw what happened with the original Jericho and the job opening popped up, she took her shot. This allowed her to get the mother that she always wanted, Dorothy Turner. George apologized once again to him, but at the moment, Julian and Shawn are both pretty shocked by this. He then tells them, though, ultimately why he came. He wants Leanne back. They don't really have much pushback to it, and they both go their separate ways. But when George gets in front of Roscoe, he's a little pissed off. He overheard their conversation. He was outside. And he says to George, wait, everything you told me was a lie? I mean, I left my family for your faith. And George tells him, you played your role. I believe it's time we return your family. The story here isn't nearly over. While Shawn and Julian were downstairs talking to Uncle George, Dorothy was upstairs trying to dig into more information about finding out who Leanne is. Although she pretty much comes up empty. There's no new information. Everything she finds is much of the same. That night, though, everybody has dinner and no one brings up what they did during the day. Dorothy doesn't say what she was doing. Julian and Shawn don't say who they were conversing with. It's actually like they're back to being a normal family. Dorothy's in such a good mood, she actually cooks. But this nice dinner gets hostile quickly when Shawn says, you know, I think I'm going to cancel my contract with the TV show. And Leanne says, you can't do that. And Julian, of all people, snaps and says, he can do whatever he wants. Leanne stands up, looks at all of them and says, you should be very careful, and then leaves. But after what they found out, none of them are all that concerned. Although they probably should be. They were lied to. Because as they're having dinner, George is whipping himself, apologizing for the lies that he told that day. He knows that by doing so, he's putting the Turner family in grave danger, but he also says, this is the last hope, and they need the strength to bring the fallen one back to the fold. In episode 8, Philadelphia has gotten hit by a freak storm. I mean, it's really, really bad. It's like a hurricane has hit the city, which is very unusual. It's so bad that rats are literally fleeing the sewers. Most of the news just thinks that it's a coincidence, just a bout of bad weather, nothing more. But Leanne, she knows that it is something more. She knows that it's something up there that's trying to get at her. And she's not worried because she knows how powerful she is. What does scare Leanne is the fact that she's quickly losing support in the house. She had one ally, and it was Julian. But lately, Julian's been super cold to her. So she knows that she has nobody left. With this storm, she really has nobody left because Snake comes to the front door and says, this is too difficult with the storm. We can't really stay here. She doesn't come right out and say that. She hints at it. And Leanne, who isn't worried at all, gives the okay for them to get to safety, saying that she'll be fine. Once she does give this order and Snake gets back to the encampment, everybody flees. So at this point, really is just Leanne on her own. This is ideal for George and the church, but they're relying on Julian and Shawn to get Leanne down to the tunnels to deliver her to them. That's easier said than done. Neither Julian or Shawn really want to be the guy to lure her down to the tunnels. They feel like that it's going to be too obvious something's going on, but ultimately they know what they have to do. And in the middle of the night, they've agreed to lure Leanne down and deliver her to members of the church. While Julian and Shawn are downstairs in the basement discussing what a difficult situation this is going to be for them, not letting go of Leanne, but just delivering her outright, Dorothy has to get up in the middle of the night because she hears something coming from Jericho's room. She knows that it's nothing to do with Jericho because he's sleeping next to her, but she's just concerned that someone's in there. And when she walks in, she's surprised because the window is open in the middle of the storm. And there's Leanne just sitting, taking it all in. The rain in her face, the wind, all of it. Dorothy closes the window because it's getting water everywhere and tells Leanne that she's got to clean it up, which Leanne does. While Leanne is cleaning up the mess, these two once again have a conversation about why Dorothy doesn't like Leanne. And Dorothy looks at her and says, "The world is full of people. Why does it have to be me whose approval you're seeking?" Leanne ignores that question and says, "Well, even Sean and Julian don't like me anymore. Maybe you can explain to them that I'm not a monster?" But Dorothy doesn't say a word to that, just fiddling with her back brace and saying that she's going to go readjust it in her bedroom. She doesn't, though. She decides to hop in the shower, and Leanne decides to go up to the attic. But just because Dorothy closed that window doesn't mean Leanne's about to not experience what's going on outside. She opens up the skylight and starts laughing in the face of God, yelling at him, "Is that all you've got?" That's when Julian comes upstairs and finds her in this state. He's done so to lure her downstairs, but he's also very concerned because it's very odd behavior. When he does finally get her down from the ladder, she says, "Don't you see, Julian? It's all for me. All of this. The storm, everything." Julian kind of ignores this and just asks Leanne to come downstairs, but after the way he's been treating her lately, she's pretty hesitant to do so. And that's when Julian grabs her and yells, "Sean, come on, quick." They don't mean to do it, but as they're carrying Leanne downstairs, they drop her. She hits her head. She's pretty dazed, but it does allow Julian and Sean to get her easily down into the tunnels. They put her in a wheelchair, tie her hands. It's pretty easy access for Uncle George. When they get down to the meeting point, it's not just George, though. It's two other members of the church, and they have a fire going. Julian's pretty concerned about why exactly they do have a fire going, and he wants to know who these other two people are, but Sean insists, "Don't even worry about it. It's not our business. Come on, let's go back upstairs." And the two do that. That is when things really take a turn. Because normally the church would try to go through the ceremony, but Uncle George doesn't try to do that. He tells Leanne that they've messed up trying to do that. It hasn't worked. They can't kill her. So what he tries to do is put the dagger into her hands and convince her that she needs to be the one to do it. She needs to be the one to set this family free. He's doing so in a very calm tone, a very convincing tone. It seems like he really is convincing her that ending her life on her own terms is the right move. But then he makes the mistake of saying, "God will forgive you all of your sins and your wickedness." And Leanne doesn't think that she has any wickedness. This pisses her off so much that she plunges the dagger through George's head, killing him instantly. She then calmly gets out of the chair and kills the other two members of the church. She finishes it all off, going through the ceremony and then lighting George's body on fire. She starts to head upstairs where a very surprised Sean and Julian hear her coming, and they can't believe it because they still believe that she's nothing more than a deranged girl. So how did she escape? Sean is definitely scared. He grabs a knife, but as he's walking towards the basement door, a gust of wind is so powerful that it breaks the glass and it plunges the knife into him. So there's Sean, stab wound and all, and that is when Leanne makes her way upstairs and sees what happened. She's not all that worried, though. Julian certainly is. He immediately starts to apologize to Leanne for what they did and says, "My phone's in the other room. I just have to go and call 911. And it seems like Leanne's going to allow him to do that. But when Julian walks by the basement door, which is open, she pushes him in. He hits his head. He's pretty delirious, and he falls into that pit, the same one that is reopened in the basement. Leanne then casually walks over to Sean, pulls the knife out of him, which is very painful, and calmly calls 911, saying, "We need 2 ambulances." Dorothy, who is upstairs, hears the commotion, and she's pretty concerned because she has no idea what is going on or what's happened with Sean. And when she asks Leanne what's going on down there, Leanne just says, "You should make sure Jericho's okay." A little while later, though, the paramedics show up. They put Julian in a gurney. They take him out. But as they're taking Sean out, Leanne whispers into his ear, "I am never allowing you back in this house again." And then he's taken away. Once everybody's gone, Leanne heads upstairs to find Dorothy sitting on the step, and she asks Leanne, "What did you do?" But Leanne, in a very sly tone, says, "I didn't do anything, Mrs. Turner. It was an accident. You know how accidents can happen. I guess it's just me and you now." And that is a terrifying situation for Dorothy. In episode 9, it's just Dorothy and Leanne in the house. Dorothy calls the hospital to try to get in touch with Sean, but the operator puts her on hold because as she tells Dorothy, "Look outside. There's a lot of people looking to get in touch with loved ones." And that's because the storms have continued. and they're really bad. We're talking torrential downpour. It looks like Hurricane Katrina outside. Eventually, Dorothy is connected with Sean, and Sean asks, "Hey, can anyone hear us?" And he sounds like he's in rough shape. Dorothy lets him know, "Yeah, it's me and Leanne here," indicating to Sean, "Be careful what you say." He tells both of them, but it's directed at Dorothy, that he doesn't think he's going to be discharged anytime soon. It'll probably be a couple days, maybe even a week. He knows that this is tough for Dorothy to hear because now she's all alone in the house with a psychopath. So he's going to send over Toby with some of her favorite things. That way, at least, she has some food. Good food. After she hangs up with Sean, Dorothy goes upstairs to tuck Jericho in bed. And that's when Leanne decides to make a phone call to Sean. She kind of starts mocking Sean on the fact that he was so close to death, but he just didn't die. And he tells her, "Dorothy's stronger than both of us combined. She'll fight you." To which Leanne tells him, "Rest well, Sean. After you heal, you're going to have to build yourself a whole new life." And then she hangs up. She then heads into Dorothy's bedroom and tells her, "I'm going to stay here tonight." And it's not like Dorothy can say no. She's terrified. But when Dorothy wakes up, Leanne isn't in her room. It's still raining outside really badly, but she's survived the night at least, and so has Jericho. She makes her way downstairs where she sees that Leanne has rearranged some furniture. When Dorothy asks her, "Why did you do this?" Leanne says, "Couldn't sleep. I was too excited." Leanne then suggests that maybe her, Dorothy, and Jericho sit down to watch a movie, but the doorbell rings, and when Dorothy mentions that that's probably Toby, Leanne decides to get the hell out of there. She doesn't want to run into Toby after what happened last time. She excused herself to use the bathroom, and Dorothy has to hobble on over to the door to grab this package. But when she grabs it, Toby's nowhere to be found. There is a card, though, that says, "Behind the construction, pretend like you're talking to Toby. We need to talk. It can't wait." So Dorothy follows these instructions, pretending like she's talking to Toby, so that Leanne doesn't come over to see why she's taking so long. This does, in fact, work. When Dorothy gets back in the house, she tells Leanne, "Hey, why don't you go upstairs and pick a movie for us?" And Leanne says, "What, you think I'm stupid? You're just going to try to escape." But Dorothy points outside to the horrible weather and says, "Leanne, where the hell am I going to go in my condition?" Still, Leanne doesn't take the bait and says, "You know what, we'll just watch a movie in the living room," and she puts on The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy knows that she has to find some way to sneak out of the house. So, in the middle of the movie, she says, "I'm just not feeling great. I think I'm going to take a pill and knock myself out for a bit." And then she asks Leanne if she'll watch Jericho, giving him a bath, reading him some books. Really, the whole time, just trying to get Leanne distracted. Leanne says sure, and then they go through the song and dance of Dorothy hobbling upstairs and getting into bed. But as soon as the coast is clear, she hobbles back downstairs and painfully sneaks out of the house in the pouring rain. She finds a car, and inside of it is Sean and Julian. She's a little surprised because Sean sounded really bad on the phone, but he was just talking it up. He needed to get in touch with his wife, and he needed to do it without Leanne standing over her shoulder listening to every word. Once Dorothy gets into the car, they actually try to leave, but Dorothy's not willing to leave without Jericho. Dorothy has completely blocked out what happened to her last August with Jericho, and that's really why Sean and Julian wanted to talk to her. It's the final thing they need to take care of, getting her to remember what happened and the fact that that child is not their son. Julian and Sean know they have to tread carefully with this, and as they gingerly set up the story, Dorothy is getting more and more agitated because she doesn't remember any of it, and she also has no idea where this story is going. I mean, it takes Sean and Julian 50 words to say happy birthday, but eventually they do get Dorothy to remember exactly what went down, and they tell her everything. And when she finds this out, she is hysterical. I mean, she goes into a legitimate fit of rage, kicking, scratching, clawing. And as Sean predicted, she blames herself. She's completely inconsolable. She makes her way out of the car into the pouring rain where Julian and Sean just have to console her. Eventually, though, they do get her up and get her back in the house. And that's when they scream for Leanne. They tell Leanne, "It's over. We just told Dorothy everything she knows." But the whole time, Leanne was a little suspicious. While she put Jericho down, she kept looking outside the window, and eventually she looked at an angle and saw that car. And there weren't supposed to be any cars on the street because there are legitimate sinkholes, massive ones. So it didn't make any sense to her. She knew that Dorothy, Sean, Julian, they must have been onto something. So while Dorothy was learning about what happened to Jericho, Leanne was taking Jericho away. So when they walk back in the house, there is no Jericho. There's just a doll. At this point, Dorothy is still in complete shock. She hasn't said a word. Sean and Julian are trying to make the case that Leanne needs to go. This is crazy. She clearly stole that baby from somebody. But that's when Leanne starts telling her side of things. She starts telling Dorothy that she can do incredible things. And the most incredible thing she did do was bring Dorothy's son back. And Dorothy can have everything that she wants. All she has to do is say the word yes. As Leanne is imploring Dorothy to say yes, Julian and Sean are saying, Dorothy, don't do it. But Leanne keeps preaching that Dorothy can have everything she wants. She can have her son back. All she has to do is say those words. Yes. So at this point, it's a literal battle between Sean and Julian begging Dorothy to say no, and Leanne whispering in her ear, encouraging her, just say yes. Dorothy finally speaks, but it's not to answer Leanne's question, it's to tell Sean and Julian to go wait in the car. Both of them don't want to do that. They start telling Dorothy, you don't know what she's done. For all we know, she could have this stolen baby in the house somewhere. But Leanne says she doesn't, and Dorothy says she's right. There's no baby here. She then gives Sean a look and says, I'll be fine. And Sean looks at Julian and says, all right, let's get in the car. We have to start trusting her. Her being Dorothy. Once they do leave, Dorothy just starts slowly making her way up the steps, acting like Leanne isn't even standing there holding this baby doll. Leanne is finally able to get Dorothy's attention, and Dorothy just asks, what are you? To which Leanne says, it doesn't matter. I'm yours. And now you don't have to hurt anymore. And we can be happy again. But Dorothy just shakes her head and says, I can't, and goes upstairs. Leanne waits a little bit, but Dorothy still hasn't come downstairs, so Leanne heads to the attic and eventually ending up on the roof, where she starts screaming at God or whoever is her higher power. This was the one thing that I wanted. Why couldn't I have it? And as she's screaming this, Philadelphia is under a torrential downpour. The likes that Noah would be like, crap, like it's really raining out here. As Leanne is screaming, she looks down in the street and she sees somebody from the church with those two twin girls. It's not Uncle George, but it's somebody else, and they're clearly there for Leanne. As she's staring at them, she gets a surprising visit from Dorothy, who has made her way up to the roof and decides that would be the best location to have a conversation. During the storm of the century, she tells Leanne, I know that was my son. I know you gave him back to me, but I can't let you do it again. It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. I would have given anything to have him for one more minute, and you gave him to me for months. But this pain that I feel now, that's part of my love for him. I need to feel it, and that's why I can't ask you to bring him back. You're not evil, Leanne. And Leanne cuts her off and says, no, I am evil. I'm bad. She then tells Dorothy the story of what happened in Wisconsin. When the house went on fire, she went into her room and she hid because she felt like she would get blamed for it. And in that moment, for the first time in her life, she was happy because she wanted her parents to die. The last thing she remembers is Uncle George taking her away. She yells at Dorothy, he brought me back. But I didn't deserve it. Dorothy, however, tries to remind her that she's not evil, saying, I met you when you were that little girl. You remember? And of course Leanne remembers. It's a pivotal moment in her life. Dorothy continues, telling Leanne, you should have been loved. I would have been so proud to have a daughter like you. The roof is then hit by a bolt of lightning and a piece of metal flies at them where Leanne has to knock Dorothy out of the way in order to save her. When that happens, Leanne starts saying, I'm too dangerous to be around. But all Dorothy cares about is getting back inside. Because they are getting soaked. I mean, this is ridiculous. They could have this conversation inside. It's dry in there. Once they get inside and dry off, Leanne tells Dorothy, Jericho forgives you. And Dorothy really appreciates that. Dorothy and Leanne then head out to go meet up with Julian and Sean, who are waiting in the car. Julian wants to get a move on because they have to get Sean back to the hospital. His stitches opened up, and the roads are getting really, really bad. Dorothy gets in, but Leanne says, I think I should stay. Dorothy says, no, it's not safe, Leanne. Get in the car. And Sean and Julian even tell her to get in the car, but she says, no, I don't think I should. Dorothy continues to implore her to get in the car, and Leanne says, I just have to get something inside that Uncle George left me. And then she looks right at Julian and says, take care of them. That's because Leanne has no plans of heading back into that car. She heads into the Turner house, locks the door, and heads down the basement where Uncle George's body was to grab the dagger. She then douses the entire house with gasoline and heads up to the 3rd floor where she drops a match and watches that baby melt away. One of the last things she does is call up Toby. He tells her he was actually thinking about her because he wants to ask her out on a date, and she says, "That sounds great. Let's do it tomorrow." And when Toby mentions that it might still be raining the next day because it's been raining constantly, she says, "It won't be raining tomorrow." And the meteorologists differ on that opinion, but meteorologists are wrong all the time, so Toby says, "Okay, then tomorrow." She then heads up to go have a conversation with that mannequin where she tells her, "I have a new mother now, and I don't need anything from you anymore. But I do wish I could ask you something. What does it feel like when you burn?" Because this fire is making its way up the house. At this point, Julian has gotten sick of waiting, so he went to go check on Leanne, and that's when he sees that the house is indeed on fire. He alerts Dorothy and Sean. They quickly call the police, call the fire department, but they can't get in the house because the fire is way too rough. All they can do is sit on the street and watch the house burn, knowing that Leanne is inside. That man with the 2 twins, he's still standing outside, and Sean runs up to him and says, "You did this." But he looks at Sean and says, "No, Mr. Turner. We tried, but we couldn't. She had to do this herself." Leanne is in the attic going through the ceremony, blinding herself, dancing, cutting herself, until ultimately the fire just takes her, burning her alive, where she falls to the 1st floor, and the entire house goes up in flames. The next day, just as she predicted, it is gorgeous and sunny out. The Turners are kind of split up, talking to different police officers. Sean is talking to one police officer who's trying to make him feel better, talking about how they can rebuild the home, but Sean says, "I don't think we're coming back." Julian is talking to another police officer, and he's waiting for the body to come out, but it never does. And Dorothy just so happens to be talking to the police officer that was there the night that Jericho died. She tells Dorothy that the fire department couldn't determine the source of the fire. Their best guess is it was a gas leak. And Dorothy doesn't say a word about Leanne. She does, however, say, "You were there that night, the night that my son died. You were really kind to me." The police officer tells her that she got in an awful wreck when she was a teenager. She crashed her parents' car going 100 miles an hour. She didn't have a pulse when the paramedics got there, but she feels like she was brought back because she understood pain. And they're supposed to help good people deal with horrible things, like Dorothy in that moment. Dorothy then looks at her and says, "Oh my God, you're one of them." And the police officer admits that, yes, she is. The Church of the Lesser Saints saved her. They helped her join the police force, and they also asked her to keep an eye on one of their sisters, Leanne. When Dorothy reconvenes with Julian and Sean, she doesn't say a word. Julian gives the update on Leanne, or at least the fact that they haven't found the body yet, and they start wondering if the cult covered it up, but Dorothy just says, "Leanne is gone." Now, for the Turners, it's just a matter of starting over. And that's something that Julian already got to do. Start over. He didn't realize it, though. That police officer, the same one that was talking to Dorothy, the same one that actually is a member of the Church of the Lesser Saints, she walks up to Julian, and he's annoyed because he gave the police his report, but she doesn't want to talk about that at all. She wants to remind him of a moment when he overdosed in the Turner household. He was dead, but he was brought back to life. She tells him, when you're given a second chance, it's for a purpose. You're sober now. You're probably seeing things more clearly. You probably even feel stronger. Julian is getting really agitated because he's realizing what this woman is saying. But what's really annoying him is the fact that she's being coy. So he yells at her, "What are you trying to say to me?" And she says, "I think you know. We'll be here when you're ready to talk. We're family now." And then she walks off. But there are 4 people staring at Julian in the street. And when Julian looks at his reflection in a storefront, he notices that there are angel wings behind him. But when he actually turns around, it's just a painting of a bird. In fact, there's actually a lot of birds. And it looks an awful lot like what Leanne had drawn in her journal. And that is the end of Servant. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. Tell me what you thought about the series ending, if you liked it, if you didn't, and if you truly believe this is the ending. Also, I've got merch, so go buy a shirt or a mug. I've got Patreon, so you can give me $1 a month. That'd be cool. Or you could simply just let my videos play and let the ads run. I got bills to pay. I'm not doing this for free. But hey, I do appreciate you checking this out.